Friday. How are you doing today? I hope you enjoyed the conference so far. And now let's come to our next discussion. We may not need a component testing, or do we? Well, first and foremost, my name is Maya Shavin. I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft Industrial AI. I'm also been working in the web and the front end and the full stack for more than 10 years. I'm a published author with my latest book on learning Vue, published by O'Reilly. So if you are interested in Learn Vue, Vue 3 plus TypeScript, check out my book. I'm also a Cloud Native Ambassador, a Vue.js Israel community organizer, and a Google developer expert in web technologies. So you can check out my blog post at mayashavin.com or follow me at mayashavin on Twitter or LinkedIn. And that's enough about myself. And let's take a step back and recap about testing. So testing, or parameter of testing, is the most essential parameter that we will use for building any testing system and in an application, right? So for this parameter of testing, we have three layers: unit test, integration test, and end-to-end test. Unit test is considered the most ground-based for all of our application testing, which including all the independent testable logics that make up to our system, to our applications. And then integration test is to test the data flow between different testable logic module together when you connect it together to make sure that nothing breaks in the middle. And finally, end-to-end test is the most expensive one, which very little test, you can see at the top of the pyramid. It's extensive, but it's also very important to simulate the experience of users step by step on how they interact with the application before you do the deployment. And so here comes the next question. Where should component testing belong to? We've been talking so much about component testing, about how we can do it with Playwright, how we do it with Cypress. But what is component testing and where do it belong to? Well, component testing in many aspects had many different meaning. In backend, it just means a piece of code, a module, a code block in the system that you need to test independently. Meanwhile, in front end, it's become more complex. So in fact, component testing we can divide into two types. Component testing in small, which is the modular testing, or we can call it unit testing. Component testing in large is meaning you are validating a component with the help of other components, such as a gallery, which depend on gallery item component to render and display the whole list of items. And which means when we test this gallery item, we don't just test the isolated individual component gallery. We have to test it together with gallery item and see if the input and output of the one component will be required for test another component will come smooth. And also we need to care about interaction of user and so on and so forth. So for that we can say that component testing comes into two types. Component testing in small, unit test. Component testing in large, integration test or end-to-end test. It really depends on how you define the flow of your individual component testing you're aiming for. So, which means in the pyramid, come to the question we asked before, where does component testing belong to? So in the pyramid of testing, it's a gray area. In fact, it's a gray area between integration test and unit test. It really depends on what scenario and your goal of testing in order to decide whether the component testing you are trying to achieve is integration or unit test. And that comes to our next question. When are we going to write a unit test for component, and when are we going to write an integration test for component better, or both, and which technology we should use to do for each scenario? So for that, let's go for our demo app. So in our demo app, we're going to have an application, very simple, a pizza store, which allow user to add to cart and then update the cart and also search and update the URL. For the demo app, we're going to use, we're going to perform the testing with comparison between two methods. The first one is Vitest with Vue Test Utils, and the second one is Playwright component testing. And here is the package that you need to install in your demo app in order to have the testing working, the testing environment working. So Vitest, Vue Test Utils, JSDOM. For Playwright, we have Playwright experimental component testing for Vue and Playwright main package. And that's with that, we are ready for our demo app. So let's take a look at our demo app. So we have a lot of components in the demo app. Each of the components here will have a relevant composables to work with to get data and to update data and to transfer data between each other. We're not going to go through all of these components. We're not going to write tests for all of these components. That is your homework. In this talk, we're going to look at the cart component and the search component. So for the cart component, we have several features. The cart component, as you may know, we have is toggleable, which means it can collapsible. Whenever we click on the cart, it will display a small popover and tell you how many items you have in cart, and it allows you to remove an item from your cart or remove all the item. And the data it will take from the external composable unused cart. Okay, so the test case we're going to write here for each of the method, Playwright component test and Vitest, we're going to write the three scenarios: toggle display with or without item and remove actions. Okay, so let's go for the demo. Good. So in this demo, we take a look at the cart component implementations. So in here, we can see that we have a toggle button. Okay, and the button will whether to show the popover or not. So in here we have the popover, and inside the popover we also have another if and else, which whether to display no item or the list item, and we have the button of remove all. Very straightforward. So when we do the test with Vitest, when we install Vitest, we can have a Vitest config on the environment inside here, or with JSDOM at our environment for the DOM simulations, and we can exclude the end-to-end test from the list so that Vitest runner would not try to run end-to-end test by accident. Okay, so let's write our first cart test. So in here, you can see I go ahead and I wrote on the selector, also to mock cart items, and I also write some spy for the used cart. And of course, I have to clear afterwards. This allows me to change the different mock implementations for the used cart hook, depending on what scenario I want to test. For the toggle display, the first thing we always need to do is to mount the component. So we do mount, and we just very simple mount cart. And then we toggle display, right? So we're going to get the toggle button selector, okay? And then we're going to, first of all, we're going to check that it's not going to display anything that, not going to display the popover. So we're going to do, not away, expect wrapper, fine. Cart selector exists to be not exist. It should be invisible to be formed. Yep. Okay. And then we will do away trigger. We click on the button and we expect it to be true, but because there's some bug here with the method invisible in Vue Test Utils, hopefully they will fix it soon. We will do our attribute, we find style and make sure that it's become empty, because when you show, it will add the display none as inline style to the component where it's not shown. And that's it, we toggle the display. Now let's move on to the next step where we going to render the cart item. For this, we have to modify the cart to have some item in order for us to see the list of items added. So in this one, we're going to mock the items cast by, and we're going to take the total of the length, okay? And we also have the remove, not just, we're going to do V, we're going to do add, which also will v.n, we're going to clear with v.n, and of course update, not v.n, okay. We don't really care about this, so we just mock it. And then we mock on the card, we're going to find all the card selector, and we expect it to have length too. Well, of course, this one will not work. We need to do the toggle button, okay? And then we need to do a wait. We trigger the click, so make sure that we click it so the pop-up will drop, will collapse, and then we make sure that the card item have length too. Of course, we can do further, like check if the card have this and this and this and that, but we don't have to. And that's it. We have finished the second scenario. Now the third scenario, when we want to trigger the button remove on. So for that, we copy the second one in here, and instead we need to add a spy on, which means not spy, it's more like a mock. Okay, so we have to do a VPN, and we will add it right here where the clip actions, and then we'll do the grab again. We're going to click, and then we're going to look for the remove on button. Wrapper, okay, and we trigger the click, and we expect the mock to be called. That's it. We just finished the three scenario using using a mocks with Vitest. Now, how about component testing with end-to-end test? Okay, so for end-to-end test, we have end-to-end folder, and we also have Playwright CT config where we define what browser we want it to run on, and with the test directory, and also on the other things like how many workers we want to run in parallel, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's go back to our cart component testing. So for component testing, we need to import it from the right package for Vue. Okay, and again, each of the callback function for the test will already have a mount method. So we go into mount the component and mount the cart. Okay, and now we're going to check. So when we do the toggle button, we can do the same thing by trying to get the locator, or we can get by row if we're very sure that they only have one button with the row button. This will be good for accessibility testing also. And then we would do component file locator, and we want I don't need this. We want to locate the cart list to and then we want to make sure that to be visible, to be true. Okay, and then we're going to do a way button click, and of course we're going to expect the cart list to be visible, to be true again when we click on the button. Great. And now the last one should display item for the next one. It should display item with display with items. So for that one of the downside is we cannot mock the cart, use cart here. So we have to kind of somehow add item to the cart. So for that, we can do it by just import the uCart directly, the composable into the test. And we do the cart we have the add functions, and we add the card into here, and we do the mount like usual, await. Okay, and then of course here we also do await. Okay, and then we do here toggle button. We get the component to get by row. Okay, and we go into await toggle button click, and then we will expect to have the locator, and we have the list to have at least one item in the list. Okay, cool. And the last one, unfortunately, you cannot write it. Well, you do. It's possible for you to write it, but we don't have an easy way to actually know where we remove it or not, because we're testing a single component. So for this, we need to do a workaround, and that can be very, very kind of troublesome. So just to recap, for the card, you can see that we very straightforward test on the scenario with for use card with mocks, and we can do it independently. However, we cannot see the actual UI rendering. But with Playwright, once you run it, you will see the browser running, and you can also stop the test for debugging, and you can see how the component render in the real browser, and whether the styling, whether the component displayed correctly or not in different browser. The downside is that you cannot mock use card like composable unless it's a HTTP request where you can mock the HTTP request to get to the data you want, or a PNG store. And for other case like remove item, you cannot test on the case independently without the workaround. For that, we need to have extra workaround, which may or may not be good enough. So let's move to another more complex component called search component. In search component, simply, we do the search, we type the search, we will trigger an event with the search, and maybe with the items, and we synchronize the URL state, the search state, like the query of the search, and it have its own state using the use search hook. Okay, so for this, we also do the same test with Vitest and Playwright on the tree scenario. Synchronization with the raw param, the updated result, and the first low existing param. So let's move on to our demo. In our search box, we can see that we have label and input, and we have two prop. One is search term, and one is item, which is a list of items. And we have an emit where we will emit whenever the search term change. And of course, we also use the router to be able to update the URL synchronization, the state of the search param. Okay, so let's go to, again, Vitest. So for that, for using router in the unit testing using Vitest, we need to import the create router and create web history from Vue router, and we will create a mock router using these two functions. And then when we render or we mount the component, we have to do a global, register it at the plugin, the global plugin router, and then we put the props, which is search item, beta, and of course items, we will do nothing. Okay, great. And now, because with our first test, it should get the search term from outside, we will check. We will get the input selector, and we expect the value to be pizza. Also, we need to make sure that the wrapper, the emit function for the first time will have the emitted will also have register the properties update. So update items, okay. And then we also expect on expected emit update, and we expect it to trigger once. Similarly, in the second test, when we update the global param, we also pass here all the params to the router, okay, and then we also don't have anything here. Or we may do some something just to beginning. And then we do the find the selector again, and then we set the value to something else. And now we expect not the router. This will not work. We will do the expect the wrapper, the input element value to be pizza. And similarly, we also expect this, but this time it will have to trigger 2 times, one at the beginning and one after you already changed the value. Great, then that's it for the search box unit testing. If you pay attention, you can see that we didn't test the update router because we had no way to know whether the router is updated or not, because this one we are using, we're not mocking it and we don't spite it. We do have a way to do it, but that's require another workaround for that. So whether or not we can do the same thing with component testing with Playwright, let's take a look. So for component testing with Playwright, when we have router, it will not work on its own. You need to go to the index.js and import the hooks from the experimental component testing before mount and trigger before mount, and make sure that you define that the mock app used for the testing are using the router, the mock router you want from here. And that's it. Now you're ready to do the component testing with router in Playwright. Again, we have to, every test function have a callback that give you the input parameter mount and page and more than that. So for this, we're going to render mount the component. And here the first test, it should get search item from outside. So for that, I'm going to mount the item using JX, which allow me to pass the prompt directly. And then I'm going to get the input and I'm going to wait for it to be pizza. That's it for the first test. The second test, I'm going to be to mount the component. This time, I don't need to put any props in the beginning, so I just mount it normally. And then again, I'm going to look for the input. I'm going to fill it with pizza. And I'm going to expect it will be pizza, and I'm going to expect the page .url will contain the search param search equal pizza. And that's it. We just complete our 2 scenario update from outside and synchronization. Okay, so to conclude it, in the search component testing, for Vitest, again, you don't have absolutely no visual testing. You cannot test with actual browser URL, which means you cannot resynchronize and check that the actual browser is updated because it's not the real browser environment. And you also need to mock the router in order for the test to run. Meanwhile, with Playwright, you can test, you can synchronize, you can test the synchronization, and you only need to initialize the router in global configuration once, and which allow you to do almost everything else. So in this way, maybe working with search component testing with Playwright makes more sense because it's actually not a unit test; it's more about integration test. So when we're going to use component testing and in unit test, or when we're going to use integration test for component testing? Well, for unit test, pretty straightforward. Anything that have minimum mock needed, independent, isolated component from other, like button, like card, items, something like that. And in the other hand, anything else will be integration test, like component test in integration test kind of mode. So for example, if a component state is controlled by another component, like a pizza card, you click on the pizza card and add to cart and then the cart update, or the search component. And when are we going to use Vitest versus Playwright? So again, Vitest is more for unit test and or integration test that doesn't need visual testing and doesn't need accessibility testing, behavioral testing, and the component is very independent, which mocks, but not a lot. For component testing using Playwright, well, when you need visual testing to see to see and believe. And when we have a behavioral accessibility testing, which you do like tap, 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 navigation flow, and so on. And when the component actually rely on other component or external data API, so it's much more sense because in this case, you are actually testing the page or have a page, which kind of component testing in front-end definition. And lastly, test what the component does, not how it works. Basically, if you test a search, you test that the component does trigger the search or filter the item, but not how it does that mechanism under the hood. And that's it. Happy testing, and I hope you enjoy my talk.